I just want to begin today by saying that Carol Conger Miller, seated in the balcony there, is a perfect mother. Carol is also the winner of the 2017 auction sermon, which is today's sermon. She bid on a sermon of her choice, and so this is it. So I repeat, Carol Conger Miller is a perfect mother. Those two statements, Carol is a perfect mother and that she, in a way, paid for this sermon, are completely unrelated, I assure you. When Carol came to meet with me and asked me, Robin, did you know that I'm a perfect mother? I thought, great, this sermon's going to go very well. But then she continued, did you also know I'm part of a Perfect Mothers Club? Awesome. And she explained, unfortunately, the club's full. Now, in case you haven't heard the tongue-in-cheekness of this all, I do not believe that Carol believes herself to be a perfect mother or that any of the mothers in the Perfect Mothers Club believe that. Perfection, in truth, which makes the Perfect Mothers Club so well named, is the absolute enemy of the good. Perfection, trying to strive for perfection, denies us joy in the moment of now and sets up impossible mountains to climb. And so the name is aptly given because that is exactly what we do to many parents, yes? Perfect mothers, perfect fathers. So the Perfect Mothers Club is a group for parents who have children who might be struggling or who have struggled in a variety of ways over the years. Now, why, you might ask, should such a club ever be needed? Tuli told me recently a story about one of her children who was very young at the time when they went to India to see family. And it was a big affair with relatives coming in from all over to see one another and to be together. And on this particular day, Tuli's toddler son was having none of it. A little bit like the child in our story played very aptly by Joelle. Tuli's son was throwing a full tantrum that seemed pretty much endless. As the meet and greet and the family celebration went on, so did the whining and the crying and the disruption. And Tuli started to feel really badly that her child was that child. And that child was ruining the day. At last, relatives started to leave as the celebration was ending. And one of Tuli's uncles, as he went out the door, gently put his hand on the boy's head and said, "Okay, bye-bye, little one. I hope that you feel better tomorrow." Tuli started to apologize, the uncle waving off her apologies. In India, it is common that children are in the midst of family, and it is understood that neither children nor their parents are perfect. But Tuli had already grown accustomed to the United States and the American cultural responses to disruptive children. It's the same in Guatemala I've experienced in my many trips there through the ministry. A baby cries, a child throws a tantrum, the community continues to move with a few people attending to support the family. Now imagine if that happened here, even in this sanctuary. What would happen right away, do you think?
Mother, take it out.
Yeah. And what would happen to most of our heads? We'd turn to watch who was the culprit of disruption. Now imagine you not only have that child with the typical tantrums that any toddlers want to have, but imagine that you are living in the United States with that child from this morning's reading. The often immediate, if not quick to emerge assumption is that it is whose fault? The parents. You have seen the eyes. Some of you have been that parent, whether it is a child who is a toddler that is biting or self-injuring, or a 10-year-old who is the kid in the corner without friends, or the teenager who does not achieve in school and has no plans for after school, or the young adult who can't keep a job and doesn't seem motivated. Some of you have that child. In a world where the reality is that friends stop asking how that child is doing, and the parents at school roll their eyes with knowing glances, and even church and community members back away. The reality is that our culture creates a need for the perfect mothers club. Mothers who band together in the midst of the judgment and fear for their child has become that child. Mothers who wonder about their own decisions and doubt themselves all the time. They worry about the isolation for their child being that child. Now, I imagine all of us had that child in school. Yeah? Like maybe some of us were that child in school. We had a girl in my school, Allison, we will call her because we are live streaming and she is on Facebook. Allison was tall and kind of just awkward amongst the girls. When we got to be a certain age in elementary school, Allison didn't smell so good. And she often seemed to smile in a fixed way that made us wonder if she was understanding what was going on or just plotting what she was going to do next. Now, for several years in elementary school, we all played with Allison, even though I think we were recognizing that something was different about Allison than us. But then in the 5th grade, a new student, Stacy, joined our school, and the place changed. We started to make fun of Allison. I even took her favorite cat eraser and misplaced it so as to ensure a midday meltdown. I never said I was nice. So what changed? Why did we go from finding a way to include Allison to ensuring that Allison was the target? That Allison would become that child? My colleague, the Reverend Meg Riley, tells a story about when she heard that her child was involved in some bullying at a young age. And so she sat her child down, and being a Unitarian Universalist minister was just shocked, right? With the values we had taught, how could her child be a part of this bullying? And her child said, well, Mom, let me go get something. I can explain. So she went upstairs, and the child brought down a book about Roman generals. And Meg's child said, you see, we have 2 generals in 5th grade. Liam and Stacy. And I know who to follow because they're in charge. They have the power. So that's how it works, Mom. Now, over the years, Meg's child became an incredibly compassionate adult. So let's not stay with the generals. Now, not many of us in a UU congregation are likely to be the generals, but a surprising number of us can slip into patterns of letting the generals take over at school, at home, and even in our congregations. Maybe even in your own being. This isn't just a sermon about the generals out there, but about the internalization of the generals, that voice within us of the bully who often has been bullied. You know, the easiest thing to do when we see that child or that adult is what? Nothing. To do nothing. To turn away. The default in our culture is the internalization of bullying. We tell ourselves in small ways there's nothing we can do. We try to self-protect from the scariness of how vulnerable we each are to having that child, and at times in our lives to being that child. The truth that those of us who are parents or who are in any relationship of intimacy are deeply vulnerable to losing that relationship or it changing suddenly and irrevocably forever keeps us from doing anything. So I want to talk for a minute about that internal bully, because these internal bullies are sneaky. They're not always appointed generals. Sometimes the internal bully is masked as sympathy, which Brené Brown tells us is the opposite of empathy, where sympathy is with you and understands and gets down on the floor to find the rhythm. Sympathy distances. Sympathy says, oh, I just can't imagine. Sympathy says, at least you have one successful child. How many folks have been the recipients of sympathy in your life? Did it feel good? No. The internal bully sometimes shows up as false boundaries. You know, Sue is just always talking about her son, and I know he's been in the hospital for 3 months after that accident, but I just can't keep listening. Compassion fatigue. I have to take care of myself. Sometimes the internal bully is questioning yourself. What could you really say or do? I find this in being raised in a culture of privacy. I don't want to bother someone by asking about their pain. I have to fight that internal messaging of, well, don't trouble them and ask them about their grief. You should leave it be. Maybe the internal bully for you is your daily reality. Maybe you wonder, what if I had done this, or what if I had done that? Maybe this is my fault. Now, parenting has an impact for sure and is part of how children manifest their behaviors. But when you have a suicidal child before 5 years old, or when you have a teenager with no social judgment, or a young adult who can't seem to find her grounding, or a child that hasn't spoken to you in years and you don't know where they are or if they are safe, and when your kid is that child and you can't walk away or tisk or blame it on sugar, then neither should your community be able to. Walk away, to tisk, to blame it on the sugar. But we do. I do. I've done it, like 4 hours ago. We get tired. We tell ourselves that there is little that we can do. We tell ourselves we're so tired with the world, and we are. We start to craft without even noticing stories that separate us, that explain away the trouble or the grief or the loss that another person is experiencing, and somehow those stories protect us and make us think that it can't happen to us. But of course it can. We diminish the impact we could have just in our presence to one another. Brené Brown says that when one of us is struggling or in pain, there's no script, there's actually no magic words, there's nothing that you could say that will take the pain away. However, she says, simply showing up, it's that simple. Being there with someone. Even saying, I don't know what to say, but I'm so glad that you told me, is sufficient a measure to begin the healing, to let someone know they're not alone. When we diminish our power to heal, we ignore our power to indirectly harm. It's not a pretty side of our humanity, but neglect can cause just as much pain as direct harm. I was at another social services training yesterday, and I've been making fun of them, but I am learning things at the social services training. And what I learned yesterday was the impact that neglect can have on folks forming all sorts of kind of traumas. So it's not only the direct harm, the intentional harm, but not asking, not taking the time to approach the person in the corner, not following up on what you heard was some struggle, that causes harm too. I even caught myself yesterday, since I'm in full confession mode with you this morning, saying when I almost volunteered for something, like a small direct service action, I found myself saying it to myself internally, like talking myself down from this little volunteer thing that I could do by saying, well, that won't get Trump impeached. What difference will that make? Would have made a difference for the person I was going to offer my presence to. I get it, we're tired lately. But I'm trying to remind myself that I have never been relieved of my despair by isolating or turning away from folks who needed my presence. Always from deep in my own despair, I have found my way out through the legacy of caring, the invitation to participate in an act, no matter how small, that calls me back. Recently, my two kids, who are twins, they're 3 years old, were sitting at the kitchen counter. And Kirk, our son, was whining and whining and whining. Just one of those mornings. I don't want to eat waffles. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. And so Ella was sitting next to him and looked at him very calmly as I'm pouring my cup of coffee in the morning. And she says, Kirk? And he looks at her and she goes, shut the F up. No lie. And you know what my immediate, took 2 seconds thought was? Oh my gosh, if she says that at Beacon, what will people think of me? Not like, let me intercept this lack of empathy or relationship between my children, or let me figure out where she said this. What will people think of me? They'll think I say those things. I don't. But once I got past that stress trigger, I remembered this community. And I told my inner bully to chill out. That I had a community that would be there, that would be vulnerable enough with me to laugh and to not start making a story about what happens in my house. Who could practice empathy. The only thing that has ever made bad situations even an ounce better. Empathy, the willingness to enter into the experience of another. Empathy, the ability to forgive yourself for not being perfect and to start anew. Empathy, the relationship that crafts creativity in the midst of pain. And empathy, the thing that in a way makes perfect parents and perfect children and perfect people of us all.